Let's get started.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome, folks. This is a Kubernetes clinic with Fairwinds. We are going to be doing Uniting Dev, Sec, and Ops Fact or Fiction. We're going to be talking through a bunch of preconceptions people have about the complexities of mixing together Dev, Sec, and Ops. So you may have heard the buzzword DevOps, but have you heard DevSecOps? Probably you have, or you wouldn't be at this webinar. But this is the idea of mixing together development, security, and operations so that they're not disparate teams owning disparate business priorities, because really they need to be working together or it doesn't actually happen. So we'll get into it. But before we do, Robert, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Robert Brennan, Director of Open Source here at Fairwinds. I've been working as a software engineer for well over a decade now, working in open source for about 6 or 7 years. And I've been working specifically on Kubernetes related things here at Fairwinds for about 3 years now.
Great, thanks. And Stevie?
Yeah, I'm Stevie. I am a senior SRE at Fairwinds. I've been here for a little over 2 years now. I hail from the Boston area. That's it.
Awesome. And I'm Kendall. I'm president at Fairwinds. I've been here for 6.5 years, which is a really long time. All Kubernetes all the time at Fairwinds for a long time. So happy to be here. Happy to be talking about this with y'all. And let's go ahead and dive in. So we're going to be addressing a couple pieces before we dive in. We're going to be talking about fact or fiction. What is this really like? What's the reality? A bunch of different considerations. As with almost everything in operations, there are trade-offs, and it's not as black or white as Robert's camera, and black and white as Robert's camera. Anyways, we're giving Robert a lot of hard time about his screen being very monochromatic. Anyways, so we're going to be talking about the nuance in a lot of these things. Some of them are very clearly fact and or fiction, and some of them are very much on a spectrum. So we'll dive in, but please feel free to use the chat to say something if you want to chime in. We also have a Q&A if you want to ask questions. I will try to monitor both and respond as we go. So if you have questions or you think we addressed something terribly wrong or left out something, please comment there and we will come back and address it. So let's go ahead and dive in. Fact or fiction? Development and security can be aligned. And gosh, I don't even know where to start with this. Like, I think that part of the reason this is a topic on here is a lot of people believe that development and security are fundamentally juxtaposed to one another, where security wants to slow down everything and make sure everything is perfectly secure. Development wants to move quickly and iterate on things. Let's start with Robert. Where do you think things fall on this?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There is some opposition there. There's two different cultures that need to figure out how to work together, but there are, ways for them to do so. And there's platforms that can help with that, help with the communication between dev and ops, or dev and security, help align their values. Because at the end of the day, everybody just wants a stable, successful product that, doesn't have any security flaws in it. Everybody has this. Yeah, right.
All right, keep going.
So yeah, it's I think this is possible, but I think the reality is that it's hard to achieve, and you need help to do it.
Yeah, Stevie, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Robert and I don't get along at all, so I don't understand how we get. I think that's what Robert said is absolutely correct. I think that you do have a shared, you have a shared goal, and I think as long as you're not, stopping each other from doing your work, I think you can work together, right? Development doesn't want to stop things from being secure, because you don't want to be that person that released something by mistake, and ops doesn't want to stop things from being, or security, the ops side of that doesn't want to stop things from being deployed, because you don't want to be responsible for, the company not meeting a requirement or a margin or something like that.
So I want to spend a minute talking about some of the practicalities of that, and like get into it, a concrete example of brass tacks, because when I think about dev and security, I'm like an analogy that immediately comes to mind is we're a city that wants to do trade with other people. Well, you know, if we build huge walls and we keep everyone out, we are incredibly secure. However, at some point we need food, you know, to come in, or we want commerce, right? So like, what are the trade-offs? And is it stopping everyone at the gate and checking their passport? Is it, you know, searching them a la TSA style at an airport? Like, you know, give me a concrete example of maybe a software tool or a process that shows dev and security agreeing on something, being aligned on it, and implementing in a way that's sane.
Yeah, I think a lot of times what you'll see is security products that kind of generate this fire hose of data saying, here are where all the vulnerabilities are across your entire environment. And a lot of them are false positives, or even if they're not false positives, maybe they're vulnerabilities that aren't exploitable for whatever reason. They generate a lot of noise is the big thing. And the thing that security teams need to focus on is triaging all that information to figure out, okay, what are the really high priority things that we really can't let through or that we really need to fix right away, and getting those in front of dev. If they're putting everything on that checklist in front of dev, even the like most minor vulnerabilities that, you know, have no ability to actually be exploited, dev is going to get exhausted and they're going to get annoyed and they're not going to want to do it. But if they really prioritize and say, okay, we picked out, these are the 5 things that, you know, are highly exploitable, you know, critical vulnerabilities, then dev is going to hear that and they're going to jump on it right away. So it's really about taking all that information you're getting out of your automated scanners and picking off the pieces you do want to put in front of your dev team as a high priority.
Yeah.
And then, go ahead, Stevie.
I would go as far so far as to say that like part of the dance there is having like your security team, your operations team, or, you know, whomever. I mean, we'll get to this, I think, in some later slides, but the idea is that like security should be everywhere and everyone should be thinking about it. And so like, you know, a security team, instead of even having to like give the dev team like, here are the vulnerabilities that we found or whatever, can set up things that there are plugins that you can use if you integrate like container scanning or vulnerability scanning into your CI/CD pipeline. Some of those plugins like will allow you to even go through and say, only report on like vulnerabilities that have this severity, right? So then you automatically are allowing your developers to see, you know, what the security issues are, but not inundating them with a bunch of stuff, because there's always going to be CVEs and vulnerabilities. Like they never go away.
Yeah, and to go back to my analogy, and then we'll move on, because this is only question number 1. You know, I think that the inundating the developers is the equivalent of a city saying, hey, we don't want anybody in our walls with any sharp objects on any of their armor, right? Versus like, hey, stop the guy with a spear, right? There's, at some point, somebody's going to get through with something. You're not going to be able to stop everything, but like, the spear's pretty obvious. Let's maybe not let in those of the Trojan horses if we can help it. And, you know, otherwise we don't need to file down every sharp object on the armor before we let it in. So I'm going to go ahead and say that is a fact that they can be aligned. Wait, what was the can be aligned? Yes. Whew. I was afraid the word was can't be aligned. Fact, they can be aligned. It's complicated, and getting in place the right systems does matter, or it will cause more friction than necessary, but it is doable. So, I mean, along those lines, security is a moving target. This week it's spears, next week it's guns. Turns out we're, you know, iterating through the centuries very, very quickly, and this guy's walking in the door with a nuke. You know, security is a moving target. Things are always changing, and we realize that that round object that looked non-threatening last week is suddenly, you know, explosive this week. How do we stay on top of? Is it a moving target, first of all, and then how do you stay on top of it if it is?
So I would say yes, it is a moving target. You know, there are vulnerabilities coming out all the time. If you look at like I think it's the OWASP database of vulnerabilities, I mean, it's just constantly growing. So I think the way you stay on top of it is to, you know, continuously scan. You know, it's not like a scan once and leave it type deal. You want that to be running over time, and you want to, in order to sort of what I was saying before, in order to make sure you actually deal with those vulnerabilities, you want to prioritize the ones that are that affect you. and the ones that can actually be exploited in your environment, the ones that will actually like cause you damage, and that sort of thing, so that you can actually deal with the influx, the deluge of vulnerabilities in a more practical way, and don't get overwhelmed. And because the worst thing to do is to just be like, there are so many, we're never going to catch up, we can't, and just like stop doing it, right? So prioritization, I think, is a continuous scanning and prioritization are two of the ways that I think you keep up with the moving target that is security.
Yeah.
Anything to add
Totally.
there, Robert?
Yeah. So I totally agree. I think, you have to be aware of the fact that, like Stevie said, new vulnerabilities are getting announced every day. So repeatedly scanning the same Docker image, or whatever it is you're scanning, is important. In case there's a new announcement, you'll be able to catch that. The other way in which it's a moving target is like new attack vectors are coming up all the time, right? It used to be you needed antivirus on all your computers, and that's how you kept the bad guys out. Now you have to scan Docker images. Who knows, 5 years from now, what we're going to be doing in order to like detect and prevent vulnerabilities. But there's constantly new methods for scanning for vulnerabilities, understanding your risk profile, et cetera. So, not just doing today's version of scanning, but kind of always having your eye on the horizon as to like, what are the ways people are going to be attacking me in 5 years, and what am I going to need to do to prevent that then, is important.
And to be clear, at the end of this, we are going to be showing some software from Fairwinds that addresses some of these things. That's part of why we're doing this webinar. It is this is a thing that we address. But I will also just add, like, every time the stack changes, security was different when you had one Linux server in your back room, and than it is in the cloud, than it is, in large VPCs, than it is in Kubernetes, than it is on Heroku, and on and on and on and on. Security is different based on the stack substantially. It's not just staying on top of every single kernel patch. There's lots more complexity the more complicated the environment gets. So wait, I keep forgetting to say what the conclusion is before we move on. Security is a moving target, also fact. Now let's talk about you can do it all yourself, fact or fiction. Who wants to start with that one?
I think we've reached our first fiction here. If you're hosting a static website on GitHub Pages or something like that, then maybe, yeah, you can do it all yourself with free tools and whatnot. But if you've got, a real website with a backend and a database that's running on scalable infrastructure, there's just so much complexity to any real live production environment that you really do need help, from hopefully a commercial partner, but at the very least, some solid open source projects and some good, internal operations and security engineers to help you understand what is your risk profile, and what do you need to be doing in order to mitigate that.
Yep. Yeah, I think to Robert's point, like, if you are a one-person show with a very small footprint that is affecting a very small percentage of the world, and it is not mission critical in any way for the website to be up all the time because it's just your personal blog and nobody's going to miss your baby pictures but your mom, yeah, you can do it all by yourself. If you are running a production environment that has a meaningful impact on a business, if things go down or are attacked, yeah, you probably want some help. So that's tools, that's other people, that's resources on the web. There's lots of ways to get help, but this is a fiction. Anything to add before I move on, Stevie? Or
nope. Okay.
Fact or fiction? The security team is the only team responsible for security, and they need to go over there in their corner and do their own thing and let us just keep going. I think this is pretty obvious, but I'm gonna hang it out there. Stevie, you wanna address?
Yeah. So I'm gonna say fiction on this one. I don't know, but yeah, I think fiction. I think that we have, there's been a traditional sort of structure where you see the security team as a separate entity, away from all the development and the deployment teams, and they're almost like the gatekeepers, right? They're like the police of like your organization. But I think is important, and this is, I think, the basis of DevSecOps, right, is that you integrate security throughout the entire pipeline so that you're not waiting to then hand this thing and the security team is then having to like go through and, address this huge, attack surface and try and find all these things, but rather, implementing security earlier in the pipeline. Like security should be more, the security team, if you have one, should be more almost of an advisor to the rest of the teams, right? So setting up policies, helping to define policies, like what vulnerabilities, severity levels, we care about, what sort of things can be allowed to, like in this case, Kubernetes, be deployed into a cluster, things like that. And then being a source of like, a source of reference for development teams and such when they run across, when they get these reports that say like, hey, this is a vulnerability you have, or something like that. So I think security is too big for like.
Well, I mean, to go back to my terrible analogy, because I'm going to keep doing that. If security is the only team responsible, it's the guy at the gate to the city, saying, hey, you can't come in because of X, Y, or Z, versus the peasants in the village before he gets there, noticing that he's carrying a bomb, or, and it's also like, maybe he gets in without a spear, and then while he's inside, he starts whittling down something until it's a spear, and you need the merchants to say, hey, this guy probably shouldn't be having that sharp object. There's a reason that the TSA has a, if you see something, say something, so that everyone is involved in security. And it's the same kind of thing across your organization. You need to have policies in place for people to raise flags and say, hey, this doesn't seem like a good idea, versus just like, you know what, not my problem. I'm going to keep putting my head down and writing all the codes. Yeah.
I'm impressed. I'm curious to see how far you can take this analogy through all these slides.
Wait till I add bicycles and horses, trolls. Robert, anything to add to this?
I'd just say, the security team is really just responsible for like helping other teams set up their security posture, understand their security profile. They're not responsible for doing all the security. Having the security team do all your security, at the risk of adding another analogy here, would be like having HR do all of your hiring, right? They're really there to just like help you set up a hiring process, help you like figure out best practices, but you wouldn't want them hiring every single engineer. You still need to have your own interviewers and things like that. So same thing with security. You want security to help you set up the process, but you got to follow the process yourself.
So if your organization has isolated your CISO into a corner, maybe panic a little bit. So the security team is the only team responsible for security? Fiction. Okay, let's move on. DevSecOps is just a meaningless buzzword. So now we're talking really strongly about opinions, but we are going to give our hard and fast fact or fiction opinion on this topic. And Robert, you want to start on this one?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a little torn on this one because it definitely is a buzzword. It gets overused all the time. It gets thrown around. But this concept of uniting development, security, and operations together and getting them all working together is a really important one, and one we should be talking about. So I'm glad this is a word that's being thrown around, even if it's getting overused. It is really hard to get all three of these groups to play together. As we alluded to earlier, they tend to have different incentives. They tend to want different things. They tend to be incentivized to achieve different goals, and making sure that they stay aligned for that, same goal of, the company being successful overall is important. Making sure they can talk to each other and speak the same language, and work together efficiently is very important.
Stevie, anything to add?
No, I'm glad, Robert, you were a little ambivalent about it, because I was going to say it's kind of like, depends on whether you think DevOps is a meaningless buzzword, which a lot of people think that is as well. So, yeah.
I mean, I think DevSecOps is this incredible ideal that is a buzzword in the sense that the vast majority of companies never come anywhere close to the reality of it. And that's because their organizations are too inefficient to do it. Their tooling is too poorly built to handle it. They don't know how to enable their developers. I mean, it's one thing for security to keep standing over there saying, hey, developers, we want you to care about security. It's another thing for security to put in place tooling that works in a way that developers understand so that they can respond and react in a way that security appreciates. And most organizations don't get there. And man, it'd be real nice if companies were making software that would make that smooth. Cough, cough. Anyways, so wait, I keep missing it. DevSecOps is just a meaningless buzzword. Yeah, kind of fiction fact, a little bit in between. A little kind of depends on how you interpret it. Doesn't have to be. Just seems to be that way in reality for a lot of organizations. Kubernetes is secure by default. Stevie, you want to start on that one?
I'm gonna go fiction on that one. I think it's not. There are a lot of attack pathways in the Kubernetes cluster. CVEs that come out are pretty, I think, indicative of the fact that it's not like secure by default. And there's nothing, Kubernetes is not by default stop you from doing things that make your cluster insecure. I think that's the biggest one, and probably the biggest cautionary tale that I would always give anyone who's starting out with containerization and Kubernetes specifically is there are tons of tutorials that are you can do this thing and voila, you have a Kubernetes cluster. And that is true. You can easily spin up a GKE cluster, EKS, whatever, but actually then hardening that environment so that it is secure, that's the next level. And that's the part that trips folks up, quite frankly. So no, it is not secure by default. There are lots of ways to shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah, I mean, because you want me to continue my analogy, it's not people giving you bricks so that you can build a Lego city, and even then you could mess it up. But Kubernetes is even less of a framework than that. It's somebody giving you rebar and cement and saying, "Good luck, buddy, build a city." And maybe you use the wrong sand. Maybe you forgot rebar in certain places. Your walls fall down because you had no idea what you were doing, or you built 70-story buildings with materials that were made for 2-story buildings. There's lots of ways to mess it up. And Kubernetes really is only a framework in the very loosest of settings. It's not even a foundation. It really is the rebar and the cement and someone saying good luck, and you have to know what you're doing. Now, cement is better than no cement, and rebar helps, but don't mistake it for a pre-built foundation for a whole town. Kubernetes is not secure by default. Robert, anything to add before I move on?
I would just echo what Stevie said. Sometimes the easiest way to get things working and running is the insecure way, and so you have to be very careful. Just because it's working does not mean you're in a good, hardened, production-ready environment.
Next, we can build it quick and dirty and then secure it later. We basically just addressed that. So, I mean, this is a little different, a little nuanced in that, yeah, you kind of can build it quick and dirty and secure it a little bit later in some situations. Sometimes securing it later means tearing down the entire village and rebuilding it from scratch because the way that you built it the first time was terrible. But sometimes you need to start with a small village because it doesn't make sense to build a metropolis out the gate. Anything to add to that? Otherwise, I'll move through this one quickly.
I would just say, one of the problems that we've seen, or one of the patterns of issues that we've seen come up are companies who deploy Kubernetes or whatever other application stack in a good enough way for day one, and then they want to layer on things like policy and security and vulnerability scanning later on, and they realize they have this huge backlog of stuff that needs to get tackled because they didn't implement it from day one. And it would have been much easier for them to just have those things on day one and be adhering to those practices from the beginning. It ends up creating a huge backlog of work if you try to start tacking on security and policy later on in the process.
Yeah, I was going to echo the same thing, which anyone on this webinar who has is on an ops team, I'm sure you have a backlog full of things that need to be fixed that you mean to go back and do at some point, and that just grows and grows and grows as your business hopefully accelerates and there are more things that you're doing. So although you technically could go back and fix a lot of these things, like Kendall said, just the reality of finding the bandwidth to do that just typically doesn't happen. And production fixes are expensive too. So, you know.
Yeah, so maybe it's a good idea to build the first few houses really, really well and worry about the wall later, rather than to build a really terrible entire city and tear it all down and rebuild it later. Right? Yeah. I feel like that's a stretch, but I tried, and that's what's important. So I'm going to go back and say we can build it quick and dirty and then secure it later. Yeah, kind of. It depends. But it can cause you problems. So, I mean, you're never going to be able to have a completely secure environment anyways. So, you're always going to be going back and securing things later, especially as it grows. Okay, fact or fiction? Building all the tooling in-house will take no time at all.
Obviously fiction. I think the bigger fiction here, though, is that you might think building all the tooling in-house will take a big upfront investment and then it'll be fine from there on out. And that's also a fiction. It's the maintenance burden of maintaining that tooling over time is a lot. You have to respond to new feature requests from folks. You have to respond to breakages. It's difficult. And if you're working in Kubernetes, how quickly that environment is changing, that ecosystem is changing, new stuff's coming out all the time. If you're doing everything in-house, you're going to be responsible for updating all the things, you're making sure you're staying on top of everything. You're really going to need a team managing that tooling in-house. So having a partner helping you with that stuff is super important.
I think the other piece here is when people say, I'm going to build this all in-house, I mean, a lot of times what they really mean is I'm going to knit together a bunch of open source, and that'll be easy because they're already built things. I'm just going to tack them all on, but there's even overhead to that. Every time you add something new to the tool chain, it adds complexity. When your company 5 years from now goes to exit and finds out that you have some GPL licensed things that are essential to everything that you have, and that ruins the entire deal. I mean, there's lots and lots of complexity. It doesn't mean don't go use tools. Go use tools. Go implement other things. But it's not the same thing as taking care of something that's well maintained by someone else. It's their job to maintain it, and it's your job to run it, and you get to call somebody and complain when it's not working right, which is kind of nice sometimes. So fiction. Next, ops can write a policy, but devs won't follow it. Fact or fiction? Who wants to start that one?
This is an interesting one.
You're a dev.
I would say often when I've seen policy written as a README somewhere or, a document in Google Docs or something like that, it is true. People just don't follow those kind of handwritten policies very well. What you need to do if you're going to be writing policy is write it as code. You need to write policy that can be automatically enforced or at least audited against what's out there. So that you can, bug people and automatically detect when they're not following these policies. It's really hard to do if it's just, a human being writing English sentences. But if you've got, say some Rego code through the OPA platform that actually can be run against YAML and detect, is this in policy or is it out of policy? I think that makes it a lot easier to make sure folks are following it or even are forced to follow it if they actually want to shift their application into production.
Yeah, I think this is somewhat, and this is a different analogy. So I hope you appreciate the change of pace here, Stevie. At an airport, you can have all the put your suitcase in this box and see if it fits that you want, and people may see those, may try their suitcase in there or not. But at the end of the day, eventually they're going to get on an airplane and they're not going to be able to stick their suitcase up above. And so, having the policy actually enforced through some kind of tooling or a box that literally won't let it fit is a way to enforce that policy. So ops can write the policy, but devs won't follow it. Yeah, sometimes fact doesn't have to be. It can be fiction in a well-built organization where ops is writing policies that devs have no choice but to follow. Fact or fiction? Communication is the main ingredient in DevSecOps. Ooh, I like that one. Stevie, you want to start?
I think it could be fact. I'm balking at the main part of it, but I think it's important. I think it's super important. I think it relates right back to the point we were just talking about, right? Where I think if I as a person on the ops side of things implemented like an OPA policy that said this thing can't be deployed to a cluster if it doesn't, have these specific parameters set in it, I think that'd be very frustrating for a dev team to like constantly be running up against like these kind of policies, right? So I think that that's part of everybody needing to be security aware all the time, having that discussion, so the dev understands why a policy is in place, and if there's some what do you call it, I'm blanking on the word, but like some reason why they can't adhere to that policy, like some outlier, then like they should be able to also come back to you and talk to you about that. So I think I think yes, communication is one of the main ingredients in DevSecOps. I think that's fact.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you don't have the communication there, you don't have DevSecOps. You have a development team, an operations team, and a security team that are all doing their own thing and probably kind of getting on each other's nerves. If you've got good communication between all three of those groups, then I think you do start to have a DevSecOps program. You start to like mix all those three things together and make sure everybody's on the same page.
Great. Okay, we're going to do two more and then we'll move on. So we can just hire a DevSecOp and we'll be fine. And this is me poking fun at people who say, well, we're just going to go hire a DevOp, which I think is very entertaining as a way for people to say, well, I'm going to hire an infrastructure engineer or somebody who's going to automate everything so that everything's fine. I think it's the same idea. People think, well, this is just if DevSecOps is the new buzzword, I can just hire a person to implement the new buzz thing and everything will be fine. And I think very clearly that this is a fiction, that this is a messy way of, bringing in an outside consultant to make sure that all of your village and moat and bridge are secure. Yeah, anything to add to that, y'all?
All I'd say is, I agree with you, Kendall. I don't think, a single hire is going to do all the DevSecOps, right? There's a reason there's three different personas here that are working together. It's not just one persona that does DevSecOps, it's developers and security and operations. And there's a reason those are three different personas. Those are three different types of engineers. They have different goals, they have different skills, they have different interests. And it's really about getting those to work together. You might be able to hire, a leader who has power, who can, really start to align those teams. So maybe that's your DevSecOp, but it's not a single engineer, right? It's a leader or somebody with power who can, get those teams aligned, who can bring in any security tooling or communications tooling that needs to be brought in to get those teams aligned, et cetera.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, let's move on to the last question here. DevSecOps makes your software development cycle slower. Stevie, what do you think?
I think fiction. I think it makes it much faster because I think it's a lot better to catch the things that need to be caught early on in the process so that you can you don't have to go through a build process every time you need to, do a scan. Like if you're doing that first and then building, that saves you a lot of time. I think there's probably a few things more frustrating than thinking you're done with your whole application and wanting to ship it and then having it get kicked back to you because there are all these vulnerabilities or security issues found with it, and you've already moved on to something else, and now you have to go back and get back into that. So I think that's going to be much faster in the long run to, again, implement security at every stage.
I totally agree. I think the reason this might seem like it is a fact is that in the short term, it probably does slow you down a little bit. There's a little bit of cost to making sure you're doing security at every step in the cycle, but like Stevie said, very quickly it's going to catch up to you if you don't practice this consistently, right? It's like thinking you can save a bit of time by not brushing your teeth every night, to introduce a Kendall-esque metaphor, right? You might save 2 minutes a day for a while, but eventually that's going to really slow you down as your teeth start to rot out of your head.
Then chewing your food is going to be slow as dirt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great. So DevSecOps makes your software development cycle slower. Fiction. I like that. Okay, so we're going to move on. I do want to remind folks that we have a Q&A bar. We have a chat bar. So if you have questions, please do chime in if there's anything that we've not talked about that you'd like us to address. But we're now going to show you Fairwinds Insights, which is software that Fairwinds makes that enables DevSecOps. And it's really about marrying together all three of these in a way that development understands, that operations appreciates, and that security can be proud of. And we're going to dive into a demo for that. But first, at a high level, Fairwinds Insights is a security and governance platform for people who are using Kubernetes. So the history of this is Fairwinds has been building and maintaining Kubernetes infrastructure for a long, long time. But it's kind of like we're those city builders. And if what people are letting into that city is terrible, it doesn't matter how great we built the city. It can all crumble down. And so this tool is the enforcement engine in a way that, or the software is the enforcement engine that makes sense for developers to use. And we're going to show you how that works, what that looks like right now. So I'm going to jump over to a demo. So when you log into Fairwinds Insights, we're going to give you an overview of the entire organization. So this is an organization called Centaurus. They're running 2 Kubernetes clusters. Both are doing pretty poorly in terms of health score. So one gets a 67%, a D plus across the organization is how we're scoring, and the other gets a 70%. So we can track that health score over time, and then it rolls up to one big health score across the organization. We're showing you what some of the top issues are across the entire organization as well. And if I click into a cluster, I can see where vulnerabilities were introduced, and you can see that we're prioritizing these critical, high, low, medium, et cetera, and that we're tracking that health score over time as well. So we do have some cost analysis on this, which I'll get into in a minute. But at a high level, this is what the initial dashboard looks like. Now, where we're pulling a lot of these checks from is here, where we're running a whole bunch of different reports. So some of this is built on top of Fairwinds open source. Polaris is our tool that exists, again, for that common misconfiguration that we see, or it's validation of correct configuration, telling you, hey, fix this, change that, this is built right. And that is an open source project that Fairwinds built. We also have in here Fairwinds tools Nova, which checks for out-of-date Helm charts, Pluto checking for deprecated APIs, and then Goldilocks, which gets resource requests and limits right. But we're pulling in best-in-class third-party open source as well, including Trivy, scanning for container vulnerabilities, KubeBench, KubeHunter, KubeSec, et cetera. And then we also have support for OPA. So if you're going to write your own custom policy, OPA has kind of become the accepted way to do that. There's lots of ways to write custom policy. This is sort of the one that's winning in cloud infrastructure, and you can go write your own policies. So all of that everything that's found gets rolled up into this view here of action items. So you can see the number of, by severity, the number of high, medium, low, critical, whatever issues that you're dealing with. Again, what those top issues are, what the namespaces are that are dealing with issues in particular. And you can scroll down, and any of these, you can sort by filter, filter high, medium, low, whatever. And you can click into any one of these issues, and it'll tell you not just what the issue is, but also importantly, how to go about fixing it. So the remediation is here saying, need to change your workload configuration in this way. So this doesn't have to be all super senior engineers that are digging through this and knocking things off. Now, like Robert said, if security comes and says, here's a report of every single thing that's wrong in your entire organization, and it's this huge, overwhelming list, it's really hard to make progress towards it. And so that's why we've built in policy and governance back in the CI/CD pipeline. We also have a process for it at the admission controller level. But here we have a developer who's pushing in code in a way that they're familiar with in GitHub. This can work with any Git or CI pipeline process. We have integrations for all kinds of things. But you can see Circle CI is passing the tests, but Fairwinds Insights is failing it. So here an engineer clicks a button, it loads them into the UI, says, hey, here are the things that should not be enabled. And you can set as an organization, you're only going to stop deployments based on high issues or critical issues and above, whatever. So, the engineer in this situation, in theory, just needs to fix these two high criticality issues, and then that deployment will go through. But it's going to tell them what went wrong and how to go about fixing it. So that's sort of high level what's there. There's a lot more in Fairwinds Insights, including we have data on resource requests and limits so that you can get your cost to very closely match what your actual usage is, what you want it to be based on your quality of service, et cetera. So we collect data on memory usage, CPU usage in your cluster, in your workloads, and we give you recommendations based on that. So here's what we're actually requesting. Here's what we're recommending. In this situation, it's actually recommending that we spend more money, but you can choose, and you can choose the quality of service that you're looking for, burstable, guaranteed, limited, et cetera, and it will adjust that recommendation. Now, I'm not an editor in this cluster, but here some of the resource request changes are going to save us money, and some of them are going to cost us money. But we really approach this problem less from a we're going to save you all the money in your Kubernetes cluster, and more from a we want to configure things correctly so that your cluster is working the way that you want it to. We also have ways to write custom policy, and there's management of role-based access controls, and we can dig in and find out what add-ons are out of date or deprecated. There's lots and lots and lots of Fairwinds Insights. I'm not going to show you the entire platform today. If you want a deeper demo, our product experts do a much better job, and you're welcome to reach out, and our sales team can connect you with them. But that's just to whet your appetite. So DevSecOps is possible. Part of what makes that possible is security implementing sane controls, operations having the tooling like Fairwinds Insights to be able to put this in place and enforce that governance, and then developers actually being stopped from deploying things into the cluster that are fundamentally broken, fundamentally insecure, et cetera. This is a tool that makes DevSecOps possible. So that's Fairwinds Insights. Did the demo. We're going to wrap up with a polling question. So if you can pull this up, Dave, what is your greatest opportunity to improve your Kubernetes environment? And spend a minute filling that out. And then I haven't seen any questions come through, but if anybody has questions, we've left time so that we can do Q&A. And we'll give that just a few more seconds. While that poll's still up, here's our last slide with Kubernetes best practices. So we have a white paper on this that you can go dig into, where we cover security, cost optimization, reliability, policy enforcement, monitoring, and alerting. So take a look at that. Also reach out if you want to hear more about Fairwinds Insights. Otherwise, Dave, I think you can wrap up the poll and can share the results with me in the background. I don't know if how that's going to go. I'll give Dave just a second to send that to me. And then, yeah, if there's no questions, thanks so much for joining us, folks. Let's see, we've got the vast majority of people said their biggest issue with Kubernetes or opportunity to improve was improving the security posture. And then about 30% said help with the basics is what they need. So just so y'all know that it makes sense. If you're attending a DevSecOps webinar, you probably want help on the security side or help with the basics. If you need any of those things, reach out to Fairwinds. That's what we do. And yeah, well, thank you. Great presentation. Yes, that's what we live for. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll wrap up here.